Welcome to the State of Cybersecurity Industry panel series. We are proud to bring together decades of cybersecurity experience from world-class experts, executives, and strategic advisors. We will explore the present and future of cybersecurity evolution, talk about compliance and regulation, best practices, emerging threats, and the impact on the IoT and OT device market.
Good morning and or good afternoon and or good evening, and a free Cybeats mug to anyone who can demonstrate that we're doing all three at the same time while watching this show. Thanks for joining us. My name is Chris Blask. I'm the Vice President of Strategy at Cybeats. I will be your moderator today for the State of Cybersecurity Industry panel, brought to you, ironically, by Cybeats. And today we're going to be talking about the SBOM economic boom. We're going to talk about the economic drivers that are or are not at play here. With us, as you see in the intro, we have Winn Schwartau, who's the founder of the security awareness company and many, many things, and Fred Cohen, who's the CEO of Management Analytics, and many things. And with Winn, we have Dr. Mark Carney and Dr. Fred Cohen. Mark is filling in for Bill McGee, who wasn't able to make it today, and happens to be in Nashville at Winn's house following DEF CON, if I'm not mistaken. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
So let me set the stage of what we're talking about here, right? So enterprises have been gaining, as we said on the intro, everybody's read this, but let me say it out loud. Enterprises have been gaining competitive advantage by increasing efficiency of software development and deployment and related things. This is the arc we've all been on for however many decades we've been doing this. Behind the security issues driving software bill of materials, as an example of what we're talking about today, are a set of economic benefits. People are doing this because they want to stay in markets, they want to gain advantages, whatever the case may be. And it's our premise that the improvement in transparency implicit in SBOM will be used by savvy enterprises to lower costs, increase competitiveness. So, we're going to discuss that today. So we have and reading from the script here, we do this.
So Chris, why don't we call it the SBOM?
It may well be the SBOM. I kind of think it is. We've been building up this for a year in these panels with the weekly interviews. Fred, you and Winn have both been on one or two of those in the past. And as over that year, we've seen the markets develop. We've seen getting past presidential executive orders and so on and so forth, right? So to keep, to play my role with any luck and keep us on track on the economics of this, we have a couple of questions to stir things up, and we'll be taking comments and so forth. And questions from viewers as we go along. So I'm supposed to say this is a live event, so please ask questions. You can use our YouTube channel chat for this. We will address all the questions in the end of the discussion. So to kick things off, thinking about where you've all come from, where we are right now, where we may think we're going, I've got these questions out here. Take them where you will. So starting with you, Winn. Anthony, if you'll roll that first one, how important is economics in any type of conflict?
Wow, I wasn't prepared for that question. I think I heard Fred mention something earlier that economics are the basis of warfare and conflict. If you look at the form of capitalism that we have, that's conflict by any definition. If you look at reasons for war through today, it's largely, whether it's a land grab, it's an asset grab, it's a power grab that means more money. If we just look at, I don't think there's anybody who could really argue that conflict is not about money, whether it's at the competitive level or it's at the nation state level. It's always somehow going to be involved with money.
All right, not quite always.
Well,
but economics, is economics different than money?
Are you talking macro?
Well, yeah, I get. Well, let me put it this way, right? Yeah, I look at, I think it was the first massive multiplayer game, Solaria, Earth 2025, right? I in the late mid 90s, when I was frankly trying to avoid doing my job, I spent a lot of time learning how to beat that game. And it's all economics, everything like that. If I set things up so that my players have more money, then they have more troops, and so on and so forth. And as I've hacked my way through business for the several decades, it all comes down to that. And so as we try to be security people, right? As we try to be security people,
a different word to use here, right? It's not economics; it's resources, right?
Well, what I'm trying to drive at here is there more to this whole supply chain thing than just security? Are we doing it to make the world more secure, or to comply, or so forth? Or is it really about business efficiency?
It's really about business efficiency. It's not about security, right? That it's security is about business efficiency. So, at the end of the day, nobody actually wants security. It's not. It's like, oh man, I can't wait to move into a new apartment. They have such nice bars on the windows. They're really nice looking bars. Can I get some extra bars on my windows? No, that's not what we're looking for here, right? So security is about, in business context, in government context, right? It's about the utility, assuring the utility of the mechanism, making sure it all does what it's supposed to do and works right, as opposed to the other facets, which are not called security, which are things like, taking risks for rewards, which is what business is all about, right? In fact, maybe it's what all life's about. So the risks and rewards, if you can talk about that instead of economics, that's really, but how important is it in conflict? Well, that's what conflict is, right? It's the trade-off of risk and rewards for multiple parties. So it's 100% important, and you should move on to the next question, my opinion.
I think that to cover off the underlying kind of theory here, like a lot of economics is driven by game theory. In many ways, there's a lot of game theory that is basically gamifying in a sense, but it is dealing with the essential notion of conflict. You've got the idea that you have party A and party B, and they're trying to compete over a particular resource or a particular thing. And so a lot of the adversarial thinking that you get in a conflict is codified inside economics through game theory. So the very strategic approaches that you have, which SBOM actually really helps with, the strategic approach to be more efficient, to be more cost effective, to have an advantage does come through, I think.
I couldn't ask for a better answer than that. And as you can tell, Mark is a Nashville native. I'll
get the guitar out.
Right. Yes. And, and I want to mention that, in this as well, it fascinates me, the people I know and the different ways. In fact, when I was talking about you earlier today, and you think in music, your background is, people know you from information security, but you're really a musician, kind of like Steve Martin really plays banjo, right? And,
I was never a musician. I was the knob twiddler.
But all right. And Mark, you're
No, not quiet.
All right. Now we're just going to be avoidant of that sort of discussion at this point. Thank you.
Right.
That's what we called it.
Well, and Mark, I've met you through Winn and these, this group sound engineer. And
as opposed to an unsound engineer.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but you can be both. You can be both, Fred.
That's true.
And I find it interesting that, security, we all really care about security. We're going to make this stuff more secure. And when you look at it from when you look at it from different perspectives, like Mark, you're a mathematician, right? But it's still the same sort of thing. How do we have the things we want to have? Well, we have to have this electronic infrastructure. If it's not secure enough, we can't have those things.
No, not more secure. Please.
Secure enough.
First of all, you keep throwing this word secure out as if somebody knew what it meant, right? Let's start with that problem. But the more and less secure would mean that there's a metric of some sort, and that it increases, or decreases on the linear scale, which I doubt if our mathematician in residence would buy into for this thing. It's very similar to the overuse of the 4-letter word that ends in K. It's the R word, right? Risk. People keep using it. They don't even know what it means, and most of them don't know what they're saying when they're talking about it. So, stop that idea that there's more secure and less secure. There's different.
So let's try to take the next question that we queued up for this and see if we can bend the conversation in that direction. So, Anthony, if you would roll that one, arguably, Fred, this is for you. Can an organization know themselves adequately without knowing their supply chain, right? So and that word adequately is in there is Fred compliant. So I'm looking to instigate your thoughts on this.
One cannot fully know oneself.
You can. Well, not fully, adequately, right? You know,
to adequately know oneself.
Well, this is the thing.
Yes, of course you can adequately know yourself without knowing your supply chain if you're dead. But if you're alive, you probably need to breathe. That's going to be part of your supply chain. And if you don't know about your next breath, you're going to have some difficulties. But this also goes to this other notion of zero knowledge, right? Which was sort of like zero trust, which is sort of like there ain't no zero. So you have to know something about your supply chain to know how you are, how you exist, how you move around in the world, how things progress over time in particular, and with notes to Winn's time approach to security, time-based security. So you have to know a lot about your supply chain to be reasonably understanding of your situation and to be able particularly to anticipate and constrain your future situation.
You know, I'm not sure I really agree with some of these know themselves. I mean, I was making notes and talking to Mark this morning about this, and I did not until Chris told me a few weeks ago, oh, SBOM, what is software bill of materials? And I'm going, why is that even a thing? Why is that even a question? And again, I grew up in the analog hardware world, and I'm going to go do a remote concert. I got to have all my bits and kits pre-tested, pre-organized, have some backup stuff, and then some additional backup stuff just in case plan A and plan B fail. And we in the physical world, we have done remarkably well with supply chains. Boeing, I mean, their supply chain was 250,000 vendors or something to build a plane. We got to the moon with a supply chain, but it was all hardware oriented. And every time anybody goes on vacation, they have to make predeterminations of what they're going to schlep along with them on the plane in order to have that supply chain filled, unless they're going to a city and can refill it on the fly. So I didn't even know this was a thing, because for me, it was so intuitively obvious that if you don't have all your bits and pieces properly organized, you're going to fail.
Let's just also come with the idea that the way that we've built software is not the way that we built buildings. You know, we kind of had a very just-in-time approach to software releasing, software production, and that's really not helped. And something that we're seeing, so I just got back from DEF CON, having helped co-organize the Quantum Village there, and one of the conversations there was about PQC, post-quantum cryptography. And the danger with all of this is actually nothing to do with quantum computers. It's to do with the way that we just do cryptography in our production systems. That's the real issue. You know, if you ask an organization, what cryptography do you use? And then how do you change it, and how easily do you do it? This is just one example where actually people are like, oh, we're not sure. We don't know what's going on. Well, ask Dave. Oh, Dave's gone. Oh, Dave's ill.
Dave's not here.
Dave's not here. Okay. Well, ask Adam then, or Freya, or something else. It's just like, and there's this kind of slopey shoulderness to cryptography, and that what that leads to is, you know, we've seen this with even huge enterprises like, I think Amazon had this not more than a year ago, where things went down because the certificate wasn't renewed. Right, which is one of the fundamental kind of outputs of just not managing your cryptographic assets. So this is a very specific example.
Well, and Facebook had a similar problem with the inability to control their DNS, and it wasn't the DNS, it was the network connectivity.
Yeah.
But so supply chain, you know, when you talk about it, it's always been there, right? You need, you know, redundancy, right, as Winn points out, right? And because everything breaks at some point. For cryptography, you need change control, and you need to know it's going to change, right? No cryptographic system has survived, you know, more than, you know, well, in the pre-digital era, none survived more than a few hundred years. But really 20 or 30 years is about as long as any cryptographic system survives, with the one exception being the one that's completely unusable for our practical purposes, which is the perfect cipher, right? So the problem is if we generate perfect random numbers, we have to distribute them, and the distribution is the problem. And if we can distribute the numbers, then we can distribute the messages. So all we're doing is pre-distributing the numbers so that we can subsequently inform ourselves of the messages. But all this supply chain has been here forever, right? We've just been ignoring it, but not in the rest of the world, right? I mean, another thing is when you make something like a building, the parts are there, it's installed, it operates. Well, not quite anymore now. My house just got solar, so apparently I'm tied to the internet somewhere somehow. I keep trying to disconnect it, but they say, sorry, you can't see the sun without the internet.
I want to hear that explanation, Fred. I mean, that's
you know, it's like, fortunately, as an electrical engineer, I can rewire the bloody thing and just avoid their problem. But it's a little bit more complicated because we send power back into the grid, and they don't want to get electrocuted, right? When they're
Fred, I really liked your comment about change control, because in the hardware world, you would think, you know, your immediate reaction, what's the change? But even in the ancient hardware world, there were updates, continuous updates of, we need to modify the circuit design and change 3 resistors so it doesn't go into oscillation, whatever it happened to be. And those have to be documented. And in the software world, I in my experience, hardware documentation and change control has been much more clear than software engineers annotating a couple lines inside of, I fixed it. Thank you. What?
Well, but even that, the deeper problem that we have right there today is that all this dependency is real time, right? So, you know, when you have a program that includes something from some other site, you don't have control of that other site. That site's including things from some other site. You know, you get to the transitive closure of information flow, which means basically anybody anywhere can change something and it'll end up destroying whatever it is you have. So the idea of change control would be that I get a copy. Instead of including it remotely, I get a copy. And when they change it, I have to do change control to verify that it doesn't screw up the rest of my system.
Yeah, well, or you can go blockchain on everything and say, let blockchain fix it.
Right.
It doesn't.
But so that's a fair amount of work, which sort of leads to the idea when you talk about the economics of this, you know, there's a lot of code that a lot of people depend on, right? And it's integrated across the supply chain, across the internet and so forth. Why don't we have the people with the money, right? The big corporations that depend on it. Why don't they all get together and pay for a common change control mechanisms? And all the small players can put in our 25 cents once a year too. And by doing this, we can put a real change control process in place that examines it. Not that it'll be perfect, but it'll sure be a heck of a lot better than what we have today. And then you use the SBOM to verify that the changes are what they're supposed to be.
I mean, Motorola's got some really great experience in this going back, 40 years? Yeah, I mean, the models exist. I don't think what you're calling for and the discussion, that's why I'm kind of blown away, because it seems to have been, from my standpoint, I didn't know the problem even existed because it was so obvious.
But you've also got other things as well. So you've got like collaboration platforms like Git, through GitHub, GitLab, all these others, where you could, in theory, build up towards that. But the issue you get there is they're tracking so much, it becomes a data problem. I think Microsoft at a recent webinar revealed finally that there was like 5.6 million files in the Windows source code. Right? 5.6 million files. And it's like, okay, so you're not having to track all of you very quickly.
No, that's the thing, Mark. They're not tracking.
Exactly. So even if
because efficiency says if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So you wait until it breaks.
The other issue that you have to add on top of that is, in the real-time change control hypothetical world that we're talking about that exists out there in many places, you can do the change, but what's your level of trust in the integrity of that particular change? And how do you do should you do a pre-verification? How do you do a pre-test before you deploy in your real systems?
Well, but
so I'm gonna jump.
Problem of how do you figure out whether software is doing what it's supposed to do or not? The answer is, without specifying it, you don't have a hope, and we don't even specify most of the software. So, but even if you do specify it, you still don't have a hope. So we're good.
So I'm going to jump in on there and I'm going to answer this question myself, right, and get on to the next one. But the question again was, can an organization know themselves adequately without knowing their supply chain? The answer until right about now has been yes, apparently. Right. On the software side of things, we've been able to, Winn, we've been hauling gear out to sites, and it's more or less been working most of the time. And folks like you and I, until a couple of years ago, and, all of us who've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, didn't really notice it, because we were just getting away with it. Right now,
no, Chris, it's never big question is big. The big question is, big question is, that we care about, we're Cybeats, right? This is what we do for a living. We've been growing our company. We got active customers doing things. We want to make security better. But is this, are we getting into the implicit parts of business? Is this one of these things like being on the internet or not? Right? That is not about security. Is about the viability of your company. It's about risk and reward. It's about taking risks for the rewards. That's why we're on the internet, because the rewards are better than the risks. That's why the advance of technology has been so spectacularly wonderful, fabulous for humanity, because all these risks, but guess what?
One of those risks was you don't know where your software is, where it came from. And we've been able to get away with that so far.
Yeah.
But so this, one of the questions we had queued up for Bill, to get inside the organizational structure, right? And we're always talking about transparency. I think fundamentally what we're talking about here is, resonates with free markets, free speech, and so forth. And we're seeing already in the early SBOM work we discussed on these events that we do, and because a lot of conversation in the small but growing community that's been focused on this the last couple of years, that what you find is, if you're a vendor, you have better customer relationships because you said you were going to do something, you did it, you can see it, you both can see it. There's a value to transparency itself, and we lay on top of that to the point where it's coming from. I think you've been able to get away with being a business and being successful enough without really adequately knowing your supply chain, because nobody was. And does it stay that way? Probably not.
So, Chris,
let me get to the questions. So the question is right now, in each of your opinions, do executives and companies, how much do they really buy into this whole transparency thing? Are we cynical or
they don't? Right. They don't.
They're terrified.
Is code speech?
Oh,
see,
we need another webinar for that one, Fred.
Think about it. When you're writing malicious code, doesn't free speech say that your code I should be able to speak my code freely without inhibition from the government?
I wrote a book back in 95, 96 that was banned from export from the U.S. because of code that was in it. And that was the U.S. government's choice to do that interpretation. Now, that's 30 years ago. I don't know what the current legal mind frame is on that.
I think the legal mind frame is unchanged.
I mean, in general, expert control. Executives do not want to admit that there ever is a problem. You do not want to have that kind of, yes, of course, we do security testing, but they never want to say, and issues were found, because then they have to say that they fixed them or not.
Yeah, but you go back then to early COVID, and Zoom suddenly zoomed, and there was this huge security issue in Zoom, and Zoom, the CEO, took full transparent responsibility for it.
Right.
Their stock kept skyrocketing up, and we'll get to it. We'll fix it in a month or whatever. It took them a little while to get it done, but at least there was an open, transparent dialogue.
Bullshit. Oh, excuse me. No.
Yeah, Fred,
you're real here. Okay. There was a public relations campaign to cause you to believe that they were being transparent and that they were going to fix it all. But what they did was they moved the subversion of the integrity of your system somewhere else within Zoom. And Zoom still has plenty of integrity problems, and now they're embedded more deeply into more systems. So I think they understand the competitive issues with transparency, but the term transparency that you use is different from, I think, the transparency term that they would use, which you would relate more to influence.
Well,
the competitive advantage of influencing you to believe we're the good guys.
Well, let's take that for
early
a second.
disinformation.
Right. I've played this role as a vendor. This makes me think of Cisco in the late 90s. The firewall line was a train wreck. We kept promising things we couldn't deliver. And we finally said, look, our bad, we screwed up. We're not going to ever deliver that stuff because that was a bad idea. We're going to deliver this in this time. It was 8 months. And in the meantime, we'll do the best we can. And that actually helped an awful lot, and we meant it, right? But to your point, Fred, you can fake that as well. I don't think it really changes, the question though, the benefit, you may have been lying about your transparency, but the value of to you economically was, the market appreciates transparency. Your customers appreciate it.
So I think you want to look back here in history, right? Yes, they do appreciate your talking to them nicely. If you look at the history of technologies like SBOM, if you look at, identity management in the late 1990s started to come to the point where people understood it was an economic advantage, right? That is to say, instead of a computer system being managed by, say 20 computer systems per systems administrator, we went to 200, then 2,000, then 20,000, then 200,000 computers being administered by one systems administrator, right? And the same thing with a lot of these other, patch management technology is, instead of patching one after the other, it's the economic advantage of the mass patch. Now, we realize that we're aggregating risk in a small number of systems that do that patch management because they're authorized to screw up everything. But the trade-off is very advantageous economically. Unfortunately, we don't increase the surety of those high consequence systems as well as we should, but so goes. And that's why Microsoft has a key that's out there that's allowing people to change UEFI interfaces and change your operating system. But it should be higher surety. Yeah, that's great. But it's the economics is, the economies of scale, lowering the price. When you look at SBOM, the economics are very clear, right? That is, when something happens and I need to find out what's there, with an SBOM in place, I can find out what's there in which systems now. The cost is near zero, and I get the information immediately, and then I can fix it immediately with my change control and patch management system. Without it, we're left in this, millions and millions of dollars of losses to address each stupid problem that comes along. So it's just the efficiency of fixing things, right? The efficiency of knowing what's there. That's what it's about. When you talk about the economic trade-off, by now it's clear and obvious. The question of what it takes to figure out what's in a system, it turns out, we have all these checksums that exist today, cryptographic checksums of software components that we're already using when we do installation. So, hey, guess what? Let's use those. Let's trace it back. So the transparency problem is this interdependency, right? I get it from you, and you have to provide me with the details of what you put in it. I could go and hunt for it, but it's better if you just provide it. So you go down the supply chain. We're going to have the same problem with keys.
But you're talking about and Chris is asking. I mean, you're looking at creating an ecosystem around something that should have already been there. The ecosystems exist in other worlds.
Yeah, but what you're creating is the method for the verification. So transparency only has any bite whatsoever.
No. It's a combination of inventory and verification, right? Exactly. You have to know what's there. That's the inventory. You have to verify that it's there. We used to do it by having people walk down the aisle and count how many are there and see what our losses are. Now we use computers, okay? Because it's more efficient.
Exactly. And that's really where an SBOM comes in, because it gives you that tool with which you can do the thing that makes your transparency actually sort of valid. Because otherwise, you can say, oh yes, we've added encryption. You added nothing says you did it right. You did it badly. You do key management properly. We added encryption could mean nearly anything if you're creative enough. But if you have an
ROT 13, we use ROT 13. Yeah. Now we're secure.
Exactly. We tick the box for secure now. But with SBOM, you're able to verify it. You're able to say, okay, it's transparency that actually has some kind of bite to it.
Which is a good segue to where I wanted to take this, right? So Fred, you mentioned earlier that executives sometimes believe that there's a value to being transparent, and sometimes they can get away with it, right? And I was going to add some more stories, but you guys have filled in good on that anyways. But in this world where they can check, transparency that is real, is that better? Is that more better for economic reasons? If you can say, here's what we're going to do, you can trust us, and then prove that, does that make you more profitable and competitive or less?
So I think when you look at the transparency issue in this way, the companies that are willing to say, here's what's there, subject to trade secrets, right? So we can't really tell you all the details of everything is there. We do have these trade secrets. We have these competitive advantages. But is it a competitive advantage at the point where I decide I'm no longer going to use you because there's a competitor that will tell me what's there and you won't, right? And so I think that the transparency as an advantage in the context of SBOM, the advantage is that if I'm going to manage my systems on a large scale, I need that automation. And if you won't support that automation and I have a choice, I won't use you. All other things being equal, right? The question of what is that economic difference? Is it $1 per license or 95 cents per license? Well, you're only going to find out in the market, right? You know, whether you can keep it up for so long. So Microsoft is the non-transparent company. Apple is the non-transparent company, right? Google is the somewhat more transparent company. You know, the Linux operating environment is the more transparent company. You know, but look at the competitive world, right? The world has moved towards Linux away from Windows. Why is that? Well, arguably because Windows sucks, but that's not the point here. I mean, it doesn't, right? The fact is, Windows operates, you know, as an operating system, it does just fine. It's got a lot of extra crap in there that you may not want, but Linux is piling itself full of that too, right? But the transparency is the major difference, right? That's really the big difference now between Linux and, you know, whatever, right? On the other hand, Cisco has never been particularly transparent, nor have their competitors, about the code in their routers. So, you know, the competition is all non-transparent. So now Linux-based routers not very heavy and effective and popular. And why is that? It's because there's not a strong, large engineering force like there is at Cisco behind Linux routing, right? They're all teeny little companies, right? If you get a large enough engineering force behind it, you can try and be transparent. The other problem with transparency is it also reveals vulnerabilities more easily, right? But the transparency is only part of it. The other side of that issue is this shared development, right? The more people you have developing it, the more opportunity there is for subversion. Each of those people is operating in an environment that's subvertible. So somebody breaks into one of those systems and subverts it. So we don't just need SBOM, you know, we need more of a DBOM, right? Digital bill of materials.
Don't get me started.
Something broader, PBOM, because the people that are able to modify things in this, you know, long supply chain have gotten to the point where they're, you know, bad guys are modifying. I hate the term bad guys because they're good guys to themselves. We just think of them as bad guys. Those bad guys are modifying the code that's in GitHub, and they're modifying, you know, the content that's on the, you know, the sources that we look for information, right? So this whole influence operation and the corruption of everything, and the moving away from science and change control and testability and all these other things, that's a problem. We're building this, you know, very high building on this not very solid foundation. SBOM is an example of something that can solidify some of the foundation. Right.
And it was a great segue into my next thoughts on this, you know, our next question, right? You know, you've talked about this when there are big enough companies and we have certain momentums and so forth, the you know, repositories being secure or not, the code repositories we use, it gets into these sort of forcing functions where you need to go down this path because the United States government says you're going to, if you want to keep doing the business that you rely on, and because, you know, actual security issues will actually bring you down and you have to deal with that. And so it's forcing us into a position, I think, to determine whether we really believe. You know, do we really believe in appropriate transparency? And Fred, you touched on this, and Nashville did as well. It doesn't mean I'm going to give you everything. I'm not giving you everything now. I'm not going to give you all of my IP. But if we agree that I am going to give you, or under these conditions, I will give you this transparency into this part that you rely on because I love you as a customer and your money and being your supplier. I think that, you know, that's what forces this. You know, it's good for, I think, all of us as security professionals. I think we get better security. It's good for the businesses like ours who actually do this stuff for a living, if we're right. it's good for the people who adopt it first. And I think that this is what I'm trying to work through with you guys here is I think it ends up being so good for all those people who are doing those things that everybody else has to do it too. I mean, you can do it the old way if you want, and if you have spare money and time and you'd like your products to be slower and your customer relationships to be worse, or you could actually appropriately believe in it well enough. So Anthony, that next question was about sectors, right? Which sectors are more susceptible to these economic advantages? And
so there's some problems with regulation, right? And we all know it, right? One of the big problems with regulation.
I thought it was perfect and solved everything.
One of the big problems is it tells you what to do. And I'm sorry, no. There's freedom, regulation. Okay. So the other problem with regulation is it tends to reduce the diversity in the ecosystem. Right.
Well, we have a question on regular. So this really I'm thinking about sectors. Like, is there a way?
I understand.
Areas, right? I know.
We do transitions here. Right? So different sectors, critical infrastructures, power infrastructure, water infrastructure, right? These have to be highly regulated, right? And the reason is that we can't live without it. So when you say everything is economics, right? Everything is utility, literally utilities. The sectors that are utility that are underlying and support all the other stuff in our society, they have to keep working and working well or society collapse. And the problem with, societal collapse is that anarchy sucks. And people don't seem to realize
it doesn't come with pizza at all, right?
People don't seem to realize that. They all think young kids, especially young. All right, so I'm older. People in their teens and 20s, until they start to recognize it, come to believe that anarchy is a good thing. And it's right that freedom is important and good. But there comes a point where freedom means if I'm pissed off, I shoot you in the head. And that's probably not a good thing for a civil society to survive and for us to thrive, which is based on that civil society of cooperation, coopetition, right? So the sectors where this is critical, it's about survival of all of us, right? So yeah, critical infrastructure protection, those sectors are critical. One of the problems in that space.
Let me jump in here, Fred, for a second on the sector thing. I agree, critical infrastructure, but I'm also thinking as you're talking and Chris was asking, how do you get enough traction to start getting other people in smaller sectors to be able to want to play the game? And what strikes me is one of the sectors, the FSISAC has put together an immense amount of global influence for standardization. And if anybody has the chutzpah and the horsepower behind them with their own engine to start putting together, we really care about SBOM stuff. I think coming out of the financial world is where it would then be able to gather some serious traction.
Yeah, but it has to be simple and inexpensive before small people are going to adopt it, right?
Yeah, but you're trying to define it. You're trying to define it. I don't want to define it. I'm looking at the meta. It's like, how else could it occur? I mean, you're going to go down to the policy meetings, Fred. I'm not.
Well, all I'm saying is that 50% plus of everybody that works in the world, it works for themselves or somebody in a small business. And all of that high level stuff that's done, in these big enterprises just isn't going to apply to them. And so we need a solution for everybody else that's simple and cheap and easy. I believe that SBOM is an example of that.
Right.
I mean, it's a framework. It should become a framework by which you can plug in, adapt, and grow, just like every other framework that we've had in our industry for 40 years.
But right. It is a framework. SBOM, we have these frameworks and they exist, right? They're using standard approaches that are widely accepted and widely known. It's not like there's a secret behind how we share this information. The cryptographic checksums are not big secrets, right? They're published.
Well, I would say that, there are actually frameworks that this is included in, they're sort of blank spaces as we go back and look at them. So we've been building it for a long time. And I like what you both said about the sectors, right? Because in both those cases, I can tell you from the field, in the finance sector, when, the big banks are going down this path, period. They don't care about the executive orders and so forth. They're really looking at, we've got 40,000 software developers and we have our own massive internal code base and we want to know where it's been, who touched it, and so on and so forth. And doing that by hand is really, really expensive. So there's a competitive advantage driven by economics, for the big banks to do that. And as you expand that one out, there are, I think, like 9,000 credit unions in the U.S. Almost all of them have 1 or 2 employees. So if the big banks are going down this path and the ISACs are going down that a similar path, then to tie this all together, to Fred, your point, there will be simple ways for the little mom and pop credit unions to do it because they have to. Yeah. And that's looking downstream in the sector itself, the actors in the sector, but they're suppliers. If my involvement in this really peaked, 3 years ago with Mehdi and Tazari at Unisys. And just saying, look, if the big banks tell us to do something, we'll do them. And this is one of them. So the big banks, suppliers, you will tell us, then that economic advantage comes in all of their supply chain. We'd like to continue selling to these big banking customers or to this huge group of small banking customers.
But these credit unions are buying from larger companies that provide those services and provide, all the change control and so forth. So that's a whole ecosystem that exists there, right? So these vertical sectors already exist where they're already transitioning into this or some similar mechanism. And as it becomes more widespread and standard, then they're going to just go with the least expensive, most effective path that's available to them, which is going to be that. Water systems, 13,000 plus water systems. Almost all of them have, 1 or 2 employees, maybe 3, right? Same problem, right? So they're driven by regulation when they have to be. They're told do this. They buy it from some supplier. The supplier provides it. So the Siemens of the world and these other suppliers of the industrial equipment, those are the ones that are adopting it for the industrial side of it. And those are the big suppliers. So if you're one of their customers, you're going to use it. So I think this rolls downhill, right?
Well, you have Siemens. When I'm looking again at the IoT and the big industrial companies, Siemens and GE, these guys know how to do this stuff already. And we as our industry, whether it's FSISAC or somebody else, there's a couple hundred years of this that already says, here's how to do it. And now how about we codify it with all the right security stuff on.
Yeah. And that's what is happening today, right? That is, this is in the inevitability curve that Chris loves to talk about. This is going to happen, right? It's not like inventory isn't going to happen. I'm sorry, At some point, the IRS is going to say, if you don't have an inventory of your software, then you're going to get audited.
From an asset standpoint, that already exists. From asset licensing and intellectual property, all of that exists. And there are some, I don't understand, the mystical accounting methods that make these things work. But now you're talking about additional layers of granularity to build in trust. And the one thing we really haven't talked about is the interdependability in the supply chain. When Fred, you do an update that conflicts with Chris's update, and suddenly Helena. I've seen it, we've all seen it.
Yeah, but also, the other side, the other one there is common mode failures, right? Because once we start all using the same algorithm and the same code to do this stuff, then when somebody exploits that or modifies or what have you, we have this enormous, vast outage or change or problem because of the common mode failure. So creating a more diverse pool, right? A bio pool or an info pool, whatever it is, creating a more diverse pool is necessary if we're going to defeat, the very high valued attacks, which are worth carrying out on these, critical components that are so endemic. The other side of all this defense and detection stuff is it also gives leverage to the attackers, right? So if I want to figure out what you have and how to attack it, then I do my intelligence and figure out you have this kind of computer and this kind of router, and then I can go down the supply chain, figure out what's there, figure out where I have a vulnerability I can exploit, and go and exploit that one against you, even indirectly.
So how much transparency should there be in the disclosure of the nature and the content of your supply chain bits and bytes and all of that? Because that has huge value to an adversary.
Yeah. So how do you do counterintelligence? How do you do counterintelligence in this environment? Yeah.
Right, which is the perfect, level of artfulness, to guide us to our last scripted question, and we touched on this already. What regulatory levers might governments pull? Right, and hopefully being artful in the phrasing these questions, because I'm using those words, intentionally. Might, will, may, good governments, bad governments. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Well, they're thinking about pulling the multi-factor authentication knob, whatever lever, and this is one I've been out on the internet communicating with people about, and part of the problem is horses for courses. I think that the 3-digit password to open my door lock is adequate, being as you have to be physically present. I really don't want it to be a 17-character thing that I have to authenticate with my phone and go over the internet in order to open my door. So this, this whole question of regulatory mandates coming in typically apply to circumstances. And one of the problems that we've had in our standards, NIST and ISO and all these standards, is they give you this broad thing that says you're supposed to do this, but they don't tell you how to do it in which circumstance. And
well, largely because we haven't all agreed ourselves on what it even means.
I think, Chris, from a regulatory standpoint, I think the first SBOM to maybe drop would probably be coming somewhere out of the EU, somewhere glued as an appendum to GDPR. Because they're the ones that are much more comfortable doing. They're going to tie it to privacy somehow to be able to sell it inside of of their ecosystem, the European ecosystem, and the US will still be behind the curve.
But it's also sold an interoperability. As someone who's exposed to that particular marketplace quite a lot, and also from working within a very large financial organization, where I have had arguments with, the various governmental bodies that I have interactions with for being too proactive. To being too forward-looking on things like cryptographic assets, on things like software assets, on things like, so that we actually do have this data to drive interoperability, which is a big thing now. We have open banking coming online. That's a huge thing. I know this is a very sort of guided idea for this, but finance is one of the most regulated areas. And often we were talking about CNI, critical national infrastructure, earlier. Where finance goes, a lot of other CNI tends to follow, because finance is driven a lot by high volumes, high speed trading, which is all digital.
And they have the money to do the development and pay for it more than any other industry.
Because we only have to see a certain, what is for most people, for most small businesses, a very small percentage increase or benefit. But for the scaling that we have, it becomes a much larger kind of benefit. And so this is where the regulation does need to sort of be complementary to things actually being improved, and not necessarily just sticks, but also carrots as well. We see too much regulation that is just, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this, else you'll get a fine. Whereas actually, when you have things like open banking, as the example I brought up earlier, if I have an SBOM that says that I'm going to work really well with all of the other things that everyone else is using, and I'm going to be, and I know my risk model, and also I know my response model as well, because once you have an SBOM and everyone knows that you're using this library, and then someone comes out with a vulnerability for this library, suddenly you're on a list of people.
Well, that gets back to how confidential does the SBOM exist? Does each organization, and how do you? There's a large structure.
The last point on this, the last thing that we noticed is that because the software that verifies SBOMs can verify itself, there's no infinite regresses.
No, I'm sorry, incorrect. It can't. But yes, thank you. There is a finite regress down to the hardware, which is a whole other set of issues we should be discussing. So when you come to these government levers, so typically they pull the cybersecurity levers on classified stuff first, starting at the highest level of classification. Then they work down into financials, because money is even more important than secrets for plenty of people in government. And then it goes to critical infrastructures, right? So those are all on the regulated side, right? So nuclear power is going to have the regulations before coal power, right? And solar, God awful. There are going to be environmental regulations that come into play. And the energy use becomes an issue. An example of this is the use of this, distributed cryptographic systems is very energy intensive as these things get long. So now we're spending enormous amounts of electrical power to generate, crypto whatever. And this is going to become a limitation if we're not careful because of the destruction to the planet. So I think there's going to be regulations at every level that are going to affect it. I think that the government's going to pull levers when it's politically expedient or when they just absolutely have to, right? Like there's no choice. And I think we're coming to the no choice level for critical infrastructures.
Does anybody know, are the Chinese along the SBOM path? Is there any intel on that?
So somebody does know, in answer to your question.
Who?
Yeah, not
Chinese.
Yeah,
but we don't have a lens inside to see if and how deep they may be addressing this issue.
3.6 meters deep.
Not particularly. Yeah, but I want to key on when you mentioned GDPR. And you mentioned GDPR, right? And it's interesting because in my experience, the EU, is not as up to speed on this. As often enough happens, but sometimes it happens in synchronicity with North America. But there's EU stakeholders have been involved with the whole supply chain SBOM thing all along. But it seems that the EU market as a whole, is less. A CIO is less likely to know what the heck an SBOM is than a US or Canadian CISO. And but your point about GDPR is very interesting. And for anybody who doesn't know what that acronym is, that's the reason we all click accept cookies on every website on the face of the bloody planet.
Only the ones that use cookies. If you use local storage instead, you don't need cookies and it works just as well.
And this may be, I think out loud here, this may be one of the cases where an unexpected regulatory structure may drive things here, because I see IP control as a big issue. Privacy, corporate privacy. I don't want to give you my stuff. But if GDPR is a relatively mature structure for managing that sort of thing, maybe it comes into play next.
I think
not the U.S. regulatory.
I think security load has to be managed in this context.
Sorry, Winn?
I said I just see the EU doing it first because their entire political mindset is a social construct that's different than in the US. It's much more popular support of the individual and the people, and their form of capitalism is not nearly as greedy as our form of capitalism that we're using. And they have the common good, and they're much more proactive in the common good.
And they're willing to put high-level politicians in jail.
Well, and
and keep the nuclear secrets out of Florida. I know.
And well, and but the issue, the number one issue I see right now blocking this is like 10, 20 years ago all over again with threat intelligence. It's the fear of losing control of your IP. That's what slows down.
It's going to come.
Right. And it may be the EU driving this. I got to be really chewing on that one. GDPR.
It's going to come fairly soon regardless, right? I mean, it is a solution to so many of the problems that we have. It's so fundamental and so long-standing an issue, inventory and verifying inventory.
You know what you have.
Yeah, right. But for the other thing I want to caution here is security load, right? So the thing about GDPR is it creates all this security load. It just all of a sudden, when I want to go to 40 websites and look for this thing that might be on any 40 of them, I now have an extra 80 button clicks that I have to click through just to be able to find out whether they have this or don't have this, or whether this information was what I was looking for. So it's destroying the efficiency of the systems as you put this load. The load should not be the way it is. It should be that I get to tell it what my policy is, and that's automatically deployed across all these systems instead of me having to manually click on it.
And suddenly you're blocked from half the websites on the planet.
Well, but I think
because I have the need to click stuff, right? I mean, my finger is injured from too much clicking, and now I have to click another 45 times just to do this search. It's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, I think that is kind of the point we're getting to, and this is why I was trying to drive this conversation. The nice thing about economics is, you can't debate it at the end of the day. If I've got 3 competitors and 2 of them adopt something new that lowers their costs and makes them more profitable and competitive, I have a choice. I can do what they're doing, or I can go to business. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here, each of these points, I can't, the automation side of it, and it has to be built in this way for these reasons. For the regulatory reasons, for the critical infrastructure reasons. And, honestly, I think the efficiencies just get found. I try to, find myself a couple of the comments in the last few minutes, the UPC, codes, right? I remember as a kid going shopping and it would be closed for inventory. We forget that every company on earth used to spend cash dollars and close down their revenue operations so they could have people physically count everything and find out what the hell they even have. And we're kind of there right now. We've been getting away with it, as I've intimated it through this, with we don't really know where our software is, but it doesn't last that long anyways. We're moving fast to we don't know where our software is, and suddenly we have to, and the cost of going through it by hand is inconceivable. And these are the sort of realities. The business people are actually really good at integrating into their worldview. And if it means, actually being, looping back to the beginning of the conversation, actually being as transparent as they're claiming, and that comes with the benefits, and they don't have a choice, then maybe we really get to,
All right, but you're missing the bigger picture, which is not just inventory of software, but obviously hardware, systems, and people and preferences.
Resources, right.
And preferences, right? So we need to apply the same thing so that we can do an SBOM, for example, of my preferences, right? So this stuff of privacy, I want Google to know this, but not Amazon. Really? Right. So, we got to get away from that.
That becomes an a user nightmare. And I know that I don't have many identities out there because I don't want to have to track all that stuff. And I have a very simple set of almost binary controls, so I don't have to think. And when you give people more control over their choices, they will screw it up more. And if you look at Walmart, I guess this was 5 years ago, Walmart used to go, and there were 22 kinds of peanut butter. Now they have 3. Why? Because they sell more when there are less choices. And when we look at these kinds of endeavors, I think that, again, we need to go back to the psychology, the human factor behind this. Is this can I have 3 options, or do I want Fred's 41 options? And I want an infinity of options, Fred. And I'm going to go,
yeah, but I want to know what I'm done. I think giving users security options is insane. I think because it's guaranteed you're not going to get it right every time. Just guaranteed. If it's like, you send me this phony spam to try and convince me to click on something so that you can determine that you were able to convince me to click on something. Guys, all you've done is make it less efficient. And not only that, you're going to punish me for it. Right?
Well, so my producer's going to punish me.
Stop it.
My producer's going to punish me if I go over. We got 2 minutes left, right? So I want to, first, thank you guys and everybody else listening out there. Mark, since you jumped in at the last minute, thank you very much for that and bringing your quantum physics big brain to all this. And, what do you think? Does the economics bend us towards more transparency?
Yes, and I also think that this is part of a more general shift in cybersecurity. Something I noticed at RSA, for example, we stop all hackers. We're going to help you when you get hacked. We are getting more proactive, finally, in cybersecurity. And I think that the SBOM is a major tool in that toolbox to be able to generate a more proactive approach to secure user experiences and also to just the safety of software.
Forensics. Just think of the forensics of ability that you would have with a good SBOM implementation.
Yeah, it's supposed to be there. What a help.
Right. Would you like to have to find it all after the crash? Well, thank you guys. This has been fantastic. There's very little I do on a daily life that I'm enjoying more than just discussing these sort of things with my friends. These group of folks that know so very, very much. So I'm going to read this bit of script here at the end that says, thank you for joining us today for our State of Cybersecurity Industry panel. Thank you to our amazing panelists, myself not included in that, for joining us. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date on all future events. And my name is Chris Blask, and with me is Fred Cohen, Mark Carney, and Winn Schwartau. So have a great day and a great week.